Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Yeah, we did some simcha singing, aka caroling, tonight. It was really sweet.
That's cute. Like
Yeah,
at people's houses or just on the street?
yeah. People say I sent a list of like, more isolated people, and then families could sign up. So we had our three tonight. It was really great.
That's such
It's
a
mostly like,
beautiful.
yeah, it's like very emotional for some of the people. Good, a good thing. I think something we should do every year. It's great. It's like so fun and nice. I mean, this year we just did it as individual families, but next year you could have big groups going around. It could be
Yeah,
nice.
the martyrs used to do stuff like that. Maybe they still do. And there's like 10
Yeah.
of them. So they would all go together and it would
Oh
be a
yeah.
party for people who are like alone
Yeah.
or they would go to like
Exactly.
old age homes also.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
So
those
fun.
connections are so affirming, and it was cool because Hody was really into it. Also, they like all tipped him, which was not expected, but they're just like, here. It's like, okay, I guess. I don't know. Like it's for the mitzvah, but they want you to be happy. So,
That's
all
fun.
right. Welcome, Ike. I think we got people joining. I'm going to go back onto mute for a minute and we'll get started soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Welcome, everyone who's just signing in. We're going to give folks another minute or two to sign on, but it's great to see everybody already. And we'll get started very soon. I'm going to watch the one after the Bartlett with President Nixon.
Hi, Leah. How you doing?
Good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you. We miss you here in Chicago.
Oh, we miss Chicago. How are Kaylee and David?
They're doing okay.
And Judah, most importantly, obviously.
Judah is awesome. Judah's awesome. And how are you doing?
Thank God we're doing okay. You know, it's a weird time to move anywhere.
I am sure. I'm sure.
We found a very welcoming community here.
Aren't you getting clobbered with a snowstorm or something?
Yeah, my kid was home from school today and he'll be home from school tomorrow as well.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah, it's all right. We're very fortunate that he even has like a daycare that's open that he can go to and be safe. Counting our
Hello, I'm just doing the dishes, but I'm listening.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
We're just chit-chatting here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome everybody. Hope everyone's doing well, and really a great treat. I'm sitting here by the light of my Chanukah candles. You see them?
Oh.
And the lights are burning brighter as Chanukah draws closer to the end. And what greater way to celebrate the growing of the light and to start thinking about leaving Chanukah with a burst of inspiration and Torah from an amazing Torah teacher and scholar. Rabbanit Leah Sarna is joining us tonight. Many of you may know her or be familiar with her. She is the Associate Director and Director of Education and Director of High School Programs at Drisha, an amazing institute of serious Torah learning, now global, originally based in New York, but now all around the world. She previously served as Director of Religious Engagement at Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel, ASBI in Chicago, leading urban Orthodox congregation, which many of us know and are very fond of and familiar with. She was ordained at Yeshivat Maharat in 2018 and has a BA in Yale University in philosophy and psychology, and also trained at the SKA Beit Midrash for Women at Migdal Oz and Drisha and the Center for Modern Torah and Leadership. Rabbanit Sarna's published works have appeared in The Atlantic, in the Washington Post, Lehrer House, My Jewish Learning, and she's lectured in Orthodox shuls and Jewish communal settings around the world and loves spreading her warm, energetic love for Torah and mitzvot with Jews in all stages of life. Very accurate last sentence. I count myself as fortunate to be one who has been inspired by her warm, energetic, and deep knowledge and love for Torah. And it's really a zechut to have you with us tonight, Rabbanit Sarna. And I will turn it over to you. I'm going to spotlight you, spotlight video, and I'm going to mute everyone else. And the source sheet Rabbanit Sarna just posted in the chat, so you can open that up.
I'll probably screen share at some point also.
Okay, great. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks so much for having me. I was saying to Debbie before that we missed Chicago an awful lot. We had hoped to be able to come back for Thanksgiving and see my husband's family, and that was not to be. So we're just, praying for swift production of these vaccines, and then we can all gather again safely and in person. But until then, we are doing this, and that means I didn't have to get on a plane to learn Torah with you all. So that has, some small silver linings, and I'm really, really pleased for the opportunity to be here. And thank you so much to Rav Ari for your tremendous leadership in Chicago and for your enduring friendship with me. And I'm just so grateful to you for this opportunity. So tonight we're talking about the Greeks. And every Hanukkah since I was an undergrad, I look at this book, which I first acquired my freshman year, and all of it is well thumbed and full of notes and scribbles and love. In my house, we refer to this as the Plato brick. And every year in Hanukkah, I sort of wonder, wow, like reading Plato was transformative for me, and I love Plato. And really, I try to particularly in my work with teens, actually, I really try and become Socrates, and try and like ask them just annoying questions that cut at things the way they wouldn't have thought about it before, and try and grow people's minds and be infinitely curious, and really like the Greek wisdom of not just that educational philosophy, but also just the idea of how to question things and how to wonder and think was so transformative for me at this like pivotal moment in my own education. And then it's Chanukah, and we talk about kind of winning against the Greeks, and I'm always sort of like, I'm glad we won the war, you know, and I'm glad that that our version of Judaism prevailed, and many of the lessons of Chanukah that have grown out of the story in terms of light over darkness and increasing light instead of decreasing light, and the famous debate of Hillel and Shammai, and a lot of the like halachot that come out of Chanukah, all of that, like no problem connecting to. That's really all a pleasure. But I just have this like enduring kind of question in my mind about, well, what does it mean to like really have been just so transformed by the Greeks? So I wanted us to look at some texts about that tonight, about how the Greeks are portrayed in the Chanukah story, but then how Greek wisdom kind of has gotten dealt with throughout, or not really throughout Jewish history, but actually just through the 1300s in Spain. That's the range of sources we'll look at together. But we'll be able to extrapolate from there onto what Torah U'Ma'ada means, this kind of vision of modern orthodoxy put forward by Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Norman Lamla Shalom, and this vision of modern orthodoxy that kind of sent me to my undergraduate education, and I went in just assuming it was totally fine to study Greek philosophy, and only later was I sort of like, hold on, pause, like, well, is it actually okay to study Greek philosophy, and why is it okay to study Greek philosophy? And I think it's, even if we walk through life with those kind of modern Orthodox assumptions about how all knowledge is kosher, I do think it behooves us every once in a while to kind of take a step back and say, hold on, where is the source of this knowledge coming from? And you know, I posted about the shiur on my Facebook page earlier today, and someone posted being like, it's not the same Greeks. And I have to say, I really don't agree with that. That, you know, the Greeks got to the land of Israel by Alexander the Great, who originally was welcomed by the Jews, and Alexander the Great studied with Aristotle. So to say, you know, oh, it's not the same, and by the time you get to the Seleucid Empire, it's not the same. You're not so many generations removed from Alexander the Great. These are people that the inheritance of Homer and of Plato and of Socrates and of Aristotle was very relevant to the culture, to the Hellenistic culture, and was very much part of what the Jews at the time were kind of contending with, and certainly, you know, not all of the pieces and the violence of the Chanukah story are inherent in these kind of great works of literature and philosophy. And yet, when you read the Iliad, like the Iliad is a story of war. You know, like there is a lot of violence in Greek literature, and there's something, and that violent culture kind of got carried over into the enemies in the Chanukah story. And there is something that we really need to ask ourselves about in terms of, where does our knowledge come from, and is all knowledge actually good? And I think Chanukah really, for me, has become that holiday of sort of like questioning those kind of foundational assumptions of modern orthodoxy, which I grew up with, and which many of us, you know, just assume, you know, in our as we go about our day-to-day lives, and rightfully so. It's not right to every minute of every day you're always questioning yourself and what you do with your life, but there is a moment for it, and I for me personally, Chanukah has really become that moment. To kind of take stock, and I wanted to like share you a little bit on my journey with it, and to look at some sources together. So I'm going to share my screen in case, just because sometimes it's hard to like juggle between like a digital source sheet and a Zoom screen. So I'll just share it here together. Let me make a little bit bigger so we can all kind of see. That might be a little too big. No, that's fine. Okay. So here's from just like, I'll just lay out the problem. I kind of just said it over, but I'll just lay it out in some texts because that's what we're doing here together. So we have from our shiur from Al Hanisim, and Al Hanisim is kind of interesting, right? Because in Al Hanisim, you don't exactly have the miracle of the oil, right? So the miracle of the oil, which is where the Bavli goes with the Hanukkah story, that's not really the story we tell in Al Hanisim, which is kind of interesting. And in Al Hanisim, we tell the story of Yimei Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol Chashmoni Banav. So in the days of Matityahu, son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Hasmoneans and his sons, the evil Greek kingdom rose up on Israel against your people, the Israelites. Their point, they rose up in order to make them forget the Torah and turn them away from the statutes, turn them away from the mitzvot. And that kind of similar story, plus an awful lot of violence, and the Al Hanisim gets into the war for sure. Then it comes up again, the first Maccabees. The different books of Maccabees are all kind of different from each other, and they're all interesting, and questions of like why they weren't canonized and what are these books doing. I don't want to get too deep into them, in part because in your own community in Skokie you have one of the world's experts, and I'm certainly not Malka Simkovich, so you should definitely go learn from my teacher, Professor Malka Simkovich, on this subject. But just in terms of just like straightforwardly, the story that's told in First Maccabees, we assume that these books were not preserved by Jews. We assume they were originally written in Hebrew. We don't have them in Hebrew. We have them in Greek as our earliest kind of manuscripts of these books. And here we have First Maccabees. So in those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, "Let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. For simply separated from them, many disasters have come upon us." This proposal pleased them, and some of the people eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to Gentile custom and removed the marks of circumcision. That sounds very painful, and abandoned the Holy Covenant. They joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. And then it gets worse from there. You have a whole bunch of history here. I skipped it. And then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all people should be one people and that all should give up their particular customs. All the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many, even from Israel, gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols. They profaned the Sabbath. And the king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, and he directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid certain burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane Sabbaths and festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and secret precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons uncircumcised. They were to make themselves abominable by everything unclean and profane, so that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances. Okay, so that's clear. He added, and whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die. Which means not only are there all these like problematic rules, but in addition to that, if you don't follow them, there's a death penalty. So we have really a problem, right? We really have like militant Greek religion, and that's definitely kind of the story of Hanukkah's both assimilation from within the Jewish people and kind of forced conversion or forced idolatry from the outside, and then the Hasmoneans fight back, and that's definitely our story. And that really sounds like a people who we should not be learning from, right? It's just evil all day long, idolatry, murder, death, all things we do not like. And the Gemara really comes to say, and that therefore we should not engage with the Greeks. So here we have the Talmud Bavli, we have the Mishnah, and we'll notice that there's certain important differences between the Mishnah and the Bavli, and it's a little bit hard to square them exactly, but here we go. So in this Mishnah here is from Masachet Sota, to the end of Masachet Sota, and it goes on, this is only the first half of the Mishnah, it goes on to famously, the rest of this Mishnah is the one where it says, when this person died, this thing ended, when this person died, this thing ended. So it's all about kind of things that we used to have that now that some historical event happened, whether like a war or a death of a rabbi, we no longer have this custom anymore, or we no longer have this capability anymore. So here's the beginning of it. So in the war of Vespasian, the sages decreed that you couldn't wear, that grooms couldn't wear crowns anymore, and also about drums. Urus is kind of a weird word for drums, but the Gemara understands it to be that. And here's the point that I'm coming here to show. The war of Titus, they decreed upon the crowns of brides. That's actually really interesting. They used to wear like cities of gold on their crowns. There's some interesting work on what that is, and it sounds very cool. Anyways, and they decreed that you shouldn't teach your child Greek. So then the Gemara says, well, what is it? Why is it that you're not allowed to teach your child Greek? And what is this Greek? Meaning, is it Greek language or is it Greek wisdom? So we'll get to that a little bit later. But first, we have a story. So Tanu Rabbanan, so we thought it was during the war of Titus. No, never mind. It's actually between the war between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. So Hyrcanus and Aristobulus are the children of Alexander, Jannaeus, and Shlomtion Hamalka, Alexandra Salome. Basically, Alexander dies. Shlomtion Hamalka becomes queen. She's the second and most whatever. She was like the queen of Israel who, of the two queens that existed, kind of did the best work. And she had two sons, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, and Josephus has a lot of stories about them, and that they were basically just always fighting and trying to get in with the Romans or the Egyptians or whoever it was, and fighting against each other for power. So it's a little bit unclear exactly what historical event, or even then to call Josephus history is also a little bit complicated, but nothing, what's described here doesn't line up exactly, as far as I know, with any like event that is described in Josephus. And so you have a fight between, you have a siege between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. So Hyrcanus is outside of Jerusalem besieging it, Aristobulus is inside. So every day, the people who were inside, Aristobulus inside, would send out money. They would like do down the wall, and then the people on the outside would send them animals for the korban tamid. Malin lehem tmidi. Okay, so they had this arrangement. Even though there's a siege, they still need the like daily sacrifices need to go on. So they send out money. They would send out animals, and that was going on. There was one sage, and most commentators presume that this sage is on the inside, who knew Greek wisdom. So again, we had talked about the Mishnah just says Greek, and here the Gemara is interpreting Greek to be Greek wisdom. So you have a sage, an elder who knows Greek wisdom, and he communicates with them by means of this Greek wisdom, and he says to them in this like Greek wisdom code, that then any time that, this is how you know he's on the inside, because he's talking to like you on the outside. So he communicates to them and says, anytime that they can successfully accomplish the temple worship, they're not going to fall to you. So the next day, the people on the inside sent money down the wall, and the people on the outside sent back a pig. When the pig got to halfway up the wall, it dug in its nails. Pigs don't exactly have nails, but okay. There was a massive earthquake. That's more or less what it's described here. The land of Israel shook 400 parsah. And then Otasha Amru Arur Adam Shigadel Chazirin Arur Adam Shilmad Libno Chokmah. And so then at that time they said, cursed is the man who raises pigs, and cursed is the person who teaches his son. And they've edited it here, right? In the Mishnah it's Yavanit, and here it's now Chokhmah Yavanit. Arur Adam Shilmad Libno Chokmah Yavanit. So and cursed is the person who teaches his son. Okay, so we're gonna get deeper into this story as we see that we're gonna see the Gemara's interpretation of it in a little bit, but I just wanted to just discuss it for like a quick second. What do you make of this story? Like the fact that the Talmud is telling us this story making these changes from the Mishnah. What is happening here? Does anyone want to kind of try and identify some pieces of movement here? What do you think is the problem that the rabbis are trying to eliminate? Like what capability did this elder, this sage have that the rabbis don't like? You don't have to participate. I can just keep talking. I don't want to like encroach on anyone.
I mean, it seems like it's corrupting in some way, this Greek knowledge, that you're able to use this corrupt knowledge to subvert temple service.
Great. So maybe it's like the having of this Greek knowledge, both, right? Because this guy both understood the power of temple service and understood how to subvert it. And what tool did he have at his disposal? It seems like he had Greek wisdom at his disposal, and that somehow gave him the ability to like understand what was going on and mess it up. And cause, like, it seems like cause like this massive earthquake to happen, like not just to destroy the temple service, but to make the land of Israel shake.
Yeah, it's like these two powers are just so different. They can't exist together. It's like a chemical reaction. Like you put them together, it's unstable if you try to mix them together.
Right. So maybe what made everything kind of quake in that way was this unstable mixture of on the one hand a holy service, and on the other hand Greek wisdom. And I'm always interested that the first book of Maccabees has a pig also, describes pigs also, and then here you have this image of them trying to send a pig up the walls of Jerusalem. You know, like we all have, thank God we're blessed in these times to have an image of the walls of Jerusalem in our mind. And it, you know, like I don't know, like for me the image of someone trying to like get a pig over the walls of Jerusalem, like there's something very like deeply disturbing about that image, and Rav Ari is kind of adding to that, like there's a certain like maybe like negative power that like that pig and the Greek wisdom kind of represent, that when combined with like the holy power of the temple was just like cause the chemical reaction. I like that a lot. Yeah, and does anyone else have other thoughts on what might be going on here? Yeah, Barry.
So they're trying to get their wisdom is unclean, like the pig, and replace ours with an unclean thoughts.
Good. So maybe there's like an attempt at replacement. Certainly that's what we saw in the book of Maccabees, right? Stop doing your own religion, take on ours instead, and you see Jews doing that. And this idea of like, oh, we used to send up an animal that was fitting for the korban tamid, for the daily sacrifice, and now we've replaced it with a pig. And so not only is it like, so to point out the difference between what you're saying and what Rav Ari is saying it's these two forces and they're like colliding with each other. And you're saying even the attempt, what they're doing via their Greek wisdom is attempting to take over. and encroach into our space and to replace our ways of worship with their ways of worship, and this pig in place of the daily sacrifices is just like a symbol of that. I think that's a great read as well. So there's one other read that I'll just put forward, which is because all the reads that have kind of been suggested so far would really militate towards a full-on rejection. Like there's no space for Greek wisdom and for Jewish wisdom to kind of live together in some way. And that's a really fair read of this text. One other way to read this text would be to say that the problem with Greek wisdom is that it enables you to conspire. Like, what was this man doing with his Greek wisdom? The most straightforwardly, he was lo'ez to someone outside the walls. They were able to communicate through their like Greek wisdom communication, and that's what enabled this whole thing to happen. And so actually the problem is that you can, the problem with Greek wisdom is only that it gives you like a communicative technique that you can then use to undermine the Jews. And that is a communication technique, or not even that it's a technique, but that someone who has learned Greek wisdom would want to then use it to like subvert or undermine the Jews. And it's less about the thing itself and more about the way you use it. So if you're using it as a communicative technique in order to be closer to people who hate the Jews, and in order to communicate better with them, and in order to conspire with them, then you're doing the wrong thing. But maybe there's a world in which you study Greek wisdom and it complements your Jewish wisdom, or it enables you to understand God's world better, or something like that. And it leaves open, I think, a door for it being for it actually like working hand in hand with Jewish wisdom. Okay, so let's keep going. I think this text is like really, really evocative. We're just not done with it. So here we're gonna keep going. The Gemara, this is the continuation of that Gemara, but this was like under my like the problem section, and here we're gonna see the Gemara already starting to suggest solutions. So the Gemara is gonna say, Ini, like, is it really the case that you're not allowed to learn Greek stuff? But Amar Rebbe be'Eretz Yisrael lashon sursi. So didn't Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi say in Eretz Yisrael, why should people speak sursi, i.e. Syriac? Ella ilashon kodesh, ilashon yavani. Rather, they should speak either Hebrew or they should speak Greek. V'amar Rav Yosef, v'vav lashon Arabi lama ela o lashon kodesh o lashon Parsi. And Rav Yosef says, so that was in Eretz Yisrael, where you should either speak Hebrew or Greek. And Rav Yosef says, and in Bavel, why should you speak Aramaic? You should either speak Hebrew or you should speak Persian. And so the Gemara says, oh, well, that's not such a convincing argument, because actually Greek language is different than Greek wisdom. Lashon Yavanit Lachud, v'chokma Yavanit Lachud. So they're actually different, and we're talking about Chokma Yavanit. We're talking about Greek wisdom, not Greek language, and that's really good. That's really useful for the Gemara, because for those of you who have learned the rules about reading Megillah and writing Megillah, and in that discussion, you really see the rabbis' love for the Greek language and how beautiful the Greek language is. And so that it's good that they're already saying, okay, we're going to separate out the Greek language from Greek wisdom. But what's so fascinating is that Greek wisdom in the story right above was communicative. Like, that was how he had a message across, was through Greek wisdom. So if Greek wisdom is communicative, then what's the difference between Greek language and Greek wisdom? Meaning, I get that it could be, like Plato laws, line 6, and then you could like get a message that would be different than just saying in Greek, like, send up a pig. But it still seems funny that like if like what this guy did wrong was communicating in Chokma Yavanit, then what really is the difference between Greek language and Greek wisdom? And so then you'd have to say, oh, it goes back to what to what the Eisenstein family was saying before, or what Urvari was saying, or what Barry was saying, of like, no, there's actually this like bigger problem with Greek wisdom, and it's not just about its communicative capability. Okay, so then we say, hold on, but is Chochmai Vanit actually prohibited? But Chochmai Vanit ni asira v'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel mishum Rishon ben Gamliel my dichtiv inni olah nafshi. Why does it say my eye affected my soul? Mikol benot iri, from due to all the daughters of my city. So what is this verse in Eicha and Lamentations talking about? They have a story. Elef Yodim Hayu b'veit Abba, Chamishma lamdu Torah, Chamishma lamdu Chachmai Vanit. There were 1,000 students in the study hall of my father. This is Rishon ben Gamliel speaking. So in Gamliel's study hall, and there were 1,000 students. 500 learned Torah, 500 learned Greek wisdom. And they all like died in the Bar Kokhba revolt, except for I'm still here, and the son of my father's brother lives in Asia. He lives in Asia Minor. So the Bar Kokhba revolt was a very sad thing that happened. But the point of the story is not the Bar Kokhba revolt and not all the death that is described, but the fact that it seems like in Rishon ben Gamliel's father's Beis Midrash, 500 students were learning Greek wisdom. So could it be that it's actually prohibited to learn Greek wisdom? Asks the Gemara. Good question. The Gemara answers, Shani shall be Rabban Gamliel dekuvin lamalchut havu. No, the house of Rabban Gamliel was different because they're close to the monarchy, so they had to learn it in order to communicate, in order to fit in order to be able to be respected, maybe. And the Stam here brings another proof about why the house of Rabban Gamliel was close to the monarchy. The Tanya, we have a Breita Mispar Komi Reza Midarche Mori, so getting a Kumi haircut, this like fancy kind of Greek haircut, is prohibited because you're not allowed to do like ridiculous things that the Gentiles do. It's prohibited because of Darke Amori. Avtus ben Ruben Hitiru Saver Komi Shukarov Lamalchut. But Avtus ben Ruben was allowed to get his haircut in the Komi style because he is close to the monarchy. And Shabbat Rabban Gamliel Hitiru Lahem Chochmai Vanit. So the Stam learns out from that story. Okay, just like Avtus was allowed to wear a Komi haircut, so too the house of Rabban Gamliel was allowed to learn Greek wisdom because they were Krovim Lamalchut, because they are close to the monarchy. Okay, so let's just dive into this close to the monarchy thing for a second. Why would being close to the monarchy allow you to do something? What you could easily say, right? I'm close to the monarchy, and that's actually a danger because I'm close to power, and I could assimilate. It seems very power is very alluring, and I should stay far away from it. So I'm going. So actually, I have to like dafka maintain my differentness and dafka not get the same haircut as everyone else or whatever. Like being close to the monarchy seems like you could make the argument that it would push in the other direction, that you have to like really work harder to be different when you're close to the monarchy. And so anyone have thoughts on this Karov L'Malchut and why it might permit you to do things that might otherwise be prohibited?
I mean, isn't it protection and money and status and other things that can help the community?
Oh, good. So being close to the government can help the community because it could get you protection, it could get you status, it could get you money, right? Like you don't want to be on the outs with the government. That certainly has never proven to be good for the Jews. So that's all definitely a good point. Does anyone else have other thoughts on? And here's the question. Here's actually what I would ask you, Debbie. Like, what limits do you think would be on that? Like, can I do anything in order to gain status with the government?
There's probably limits. If it's it's not all or nothing, but certainly there were needs for the Jews to have protection. So I think if it's right, if it conflicts with if you're told to eat a pig, right, that's what is in the story. That's where the tension comes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so but what I like about what you're suggesting, right? I like these like concrete examples, because then it tells you something about like what it tells you something about what chokhmah is, right? So in your understanding, chokhmah, this like study of Greek wisdom that they were doing in the house of Rabban Gamliel, maybe it's not totally allowed, but it's better than eating a pig, right? Like eating a pig is a worse kind of violation than studying chokhmah, right? I think fair to say, right? And I think you might have said that without this story also.
Okay.
So I mean, because you're trying to get a feel for like, well, this seems like it's something we're uncomfortable with, right? We had this story that we started out with. We're really uncomfortable with compliance and and it caused like it caused this like terrible destruction to this like massive earthquake, let's say, in the land of Israel, and like what exactly happened? We had all these ideas, right? And then the Gemara kind of walks back from it and says, oh, Greek language? No, Greek language, so beautiful. We love Greek language. Okay, it's not Greek language. Okay, well then, what about Rabban Gamliel? And then the answer is, oh, well, Rabban Gamliel, it's different because he's close to the government. So, but we're still like that discomfort that started out really strong is starting to a little bit unravel. So the question is like where we've kind of landed, right? Like if we had just seen that first story and the Mishnah, we would say like absolutely not. Like Leah cannot study Plato without question. And now we're starting to see, the real question is, does Leah live in Washington, D.C.? And if she lives in Washington, D.C., it kind of seems like maybe she's something like Rabban Gamliel. She has to hawk with all the other people who've learned Plato, and so then she needs to be holding in Plato. Right, so it's starting to unravel of like, well, if you have a good use for it, maybe it's allowed. Unlike pig, where like, I mean, unless it's keeping you alive, in which case, like if the COVID vaccine had pig in it, no one would tell you to hesitate before taking it. But otherwise, it's not. Studying Plato is not quite at that level, and otherwise we would never say like, yeah, like if you're invited to the White House Chanukah party, totally it's fine to eat pig while you're there. Like, no, it's not fine. Like, saw your way through a through a kosher meal at the White House Chanukah party, or maybe they, I don't know, maybe they care. I think Ravari maybe went to one of these one time, maybe somehow. Anyways,
I could see another parallel here, but a parallel between the pig imagery and the monarchy imagery, because the way in at least one midrash, one well-known midrash, that the rabbis conceive of the pig is as a deceptive creature. He stands for deception, because in the world of kashrut, right, the pig has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud. So
that's
on
what
the
I thought was
outside,
so interesting, that the story describes the pig as having nails, because the pigs famously have split hooves.
That's why the focus is on that, I think, or I'm suggesting. I don't think anything yet, but for sake of discussion, it seems like deception is coming out here, because that's what the pig stands for. And in fact, they describe the pig as trying to convince people that it's actually kosher by standing up and holding its hooves out, which is kind of how you think of him going up the wall when they send it up instead of the kosher animal. And it's the kind of thing that perhaps like Greek philosophy, where it looks good on the outside, but when you dig deeper, you find that it's really not kosher. It's really not good. It's not right. And then it occurs to me that when it comes to government, the rabbis seem to have a similar point of view, like the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, where they say that beware of the government because they act like they are your friend and actually they want to kill you. They're your enemy. Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. So slowly, to me anyway, it seems like a pattern is emerging. Greek thought, deceptive pigs, dishonorable and deceptive government, and who knows what's yet to come in the source sheet. I don't know if
Yeah.
if that stands up to anything you're trying to convey, but
No, I love that. I love that because what it will cut at then is that there's a bigger problem, and that problem is a values problem that gets carried out in a lot of different places, and that the Greek kind of rule over Eretz Yisrael maybe like lived out in a specific way, and that's maybe what we're talking about in the Chanukah story, definitely. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about the Hyrcanus and Aristobulus story is that they're Hasmonean, but they're brothers. So it's not like you have like the Jews inside and the Greeks outside. Like you have, it seems like, at least the way the story is told. And again, like we don't have other like outside history on this, but those two characters are both Jews. They're both Hasmoneans, and they're fighting against each other. And it seems like it's possibly even Jews on both sides. But it's like, and it's unclear also in the like Hyrcanus versus Aristobulus. Like it's not 1,000% clear like who's better. But anyways, right. So I did that is like an important part of the story. Just that like the pig maybe like represents the Greeks or is like problematic in the same way as the Greeks, and definitely is coming to like undo temple worship. But there is, I should have mentioned that earlier. Like there is like some. We should not get too carried away with the people on the outside being the Greeks, because they're probably also Jews, but Hellenized and certainly have a pig and are willing to send it up the wall. Yeah. But anyways, that was thank you. That I think that's a really, really interesting read. That like the pig is really this kind of like central metaphor here in terms and its duplicity. Ravari, were you going to say something before?
No, just listening.
Okay. I know I called you out about that White House Hanukkah party. Maybe you were coming in to say something about that.
Listen to the Mishnah and Avos. Don't get too close to government.
Okay, back to this. Yeah. Okay, so here, so I think already we're starting to see a little bit of like leeway. We have Jewish role models who are learning Greek wisdom, i.e. Rabban Gamliel. One can do worse than Rabban Gamliel, though obviously we have some hesitations about Jews who are close to political power in that way. And that's also, by the way, like the rabbis had a lot of hesitations about the Hasmoneans in general, because you have, famously you have a collapse between rule and priesthood that the rabbis certainly didn't like, and they definitely viewed the Hasmoneans as just like incredibly corrupt, which in all likelihood they very much were. And yeah, so this idea that like they're allowed to do it because they're close to the government, well, that doesn't necessarily mean, even though, as Debbie said, like for the community, it's important for someone to be close to the government, but that doesn't mean that they're a Jewish role model in the things they have to do in order to be close to the government. And it doesn't mean it should then be permitted necessarily to an average, not close to the government Jew. Okay. So here we're going to get a little bit more specific in Mishnah Yadayim. This takes it a little bit of a different direction. But here we have another mention in the Mishnah of Greek wisdom. And you can tell all of a sudden that the rabbis were actually, they knew what they were talking about in terms of Greek wisdom. So here, the context of Mishnah Yadayim is that we'll see in a second, but Kibbei Kodesh Mitanim and Yadayim, like scripture, Torah text, make the hands impure, which means you have to do Netilat Yadayim, you have to wash your hands before you touch them. Okay, so you can say the Sadducees say, we think it's ridiculous about you guys, the Pharisees, that you say holy scriptures defile the hands, and therefore you have to wash your hands when you're touching them. But the books of Homer, Sifrei Homeros, don't defile the hands. Like the Sadducees are saying, what should be more defiling? The books of Homer should defile more than the scriptures. Whereas in like our halacha, or like Pharisaic law or whatever, the books of scripture defile the hands more than the books of Homer. Amar Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Yochanan ben Zakkai says, huh, that's the best you have against us? Right, we would say, what the bones of Yochanan the high priest are more defiling than the bones of a donkey, right? It's not just what you're going to complain about us about books. Let's talk about humans. The bones of a donkey defile less than the bones of of Yochanan the high priest. Let me say to you like this: Lefi chibatan hi tumatan. That in accordance with their with how beloved they are, that's how defiling they are. We could spend a month talking about that line. I think it's like a really, really amazing, beautiful, and fascinating idea that things give off. We assign rabbinic impurity to things that we love and want to protect, because when things aren't pure, we have to be careful around them. And that okay, so lefi chibatan hi tumatan. So that someone should not take the bones of his parents and turn them into spoons, right? We assign the bones of your parents impurities, so you have to treat them respectfully. You have to put them in the ground. You have to bury them all respectfully. Because if we said, "Oh, the bones of your parents don't give off impurities," then you would treat them very disrespectfully. You would turn them into spoons. He says to them, so too with scripture, according to how beloved they are, that is how much they defile. The Sifrei Homeros she'enan chavivin, and books of Homer that are not beloved, enan netamim hayadayim. Books of Homer, therefore, do not make your hands impure. So if you had just, like, without any context, if you had just read this, I think you would think you're allowed to read Homer. I think you from just this Mishnah, you would say, okay, Homer versus Tanakh. Obviously, Tanakh is more beloved. Obviously, Tanakh has all these rules when you study Tanakh that protect the books, that make sure you don't touch the books with like hands full of food or anything like that. Okay, we're going to be very careful. But at the end of the day, are you allowed to touch a book of Homer? Are you allowed to pick it up? Are you allowed to read it? Like, yeah, it just doesn't. It's just not the same level. And so far, and what it reflects also is that it was a well-known enough book and a common enough book that people had around that it made sense for the Mishnah to talk about it, which I think is also very fascinating. That the Mishnah really had mentions Sifrei Homeros as if like what books do people have in their homes? They have Kiddei Kodesh and they have Homer. And you treat and we're trying to teach you to treat them differently because one is more important than the other. And it reminds me, whenever I read this Mishnah, it just reminds me like when we were in elementary school and they taught us like if you have a stack of books, so it should be like your Tanakh on the top and then your shiur, and then after that should be like your math textbook or whatever. And like we would like go around school like rearranging stacks of books if we saw something like on top of a Tanakh or whatever. I feel like that's very much like the same kind of like teaching of sensitivity towards religious works that that this Mishnah says. But at the end of the day, right, all it means is stack your Tanakh on top of your math textbook, not don't have a math textbook. So I think this really kind of strokes in the direction of like, okay, they're different, just recognize they're different. And then we have more evidence to that effect from the Yerushalmi. So we have a Mishnah, a very famous Mishnah in the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, listing, right, it starts out, every Jew has a place in the world to come, and then it goes on to say, oh, but there's some people who don't have a place in the world to come, and who are they? It's someone who says there's no resurrection of the dead, someone who says the Torah is not from heaven, and Apikoros, right, and then the Gemara goes on to describe who is Apikoros, and Rabbi Akiva says he also someone who reads external literature. So what is external literature? Right, because we just saw Mishnah that says, or suggests at least, oh, you can read a Homer, just like don't treat it the same way as you treat your Tanakh. It didn't say burn your Homer, don't have your Homer, what is Homer anyways, Jews don't know about that stuff. No, it just said treat it differently, right? And here all of a sudden you have Rabbi Akiva saying, if you read external literature, you've lost your place in the world to come, right? It's the same level as someone who says the Torah is not written by God. Okay, so that's a pretty serious thing. And in fact, here in the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Akiva goes on to explain, or so Rabbi Akiva says, right? Even someone who reads outside literature. And he says, what is outside literature? That literature is the books of Ben Sira and the books of Ben La'ana. We don't know, as far as I know, we don't know what the books of Ben La'ana are. We have Ben Sira. It seems like Ben La'ana maybe is something else, or like we're just didn't survive. Anyways, okay, for another time. / again, always ask Dr. Singovich. About Sifrei Homeros, the books of Homer, the close and all books that are written kind of from now going forward. If you read from them, it's as if you're just reading financial documents. And is it allowed to read financial documents? Yes, right. So it's that, and that has very much that same kind of flavor as the Mishnah and Yadayim had of like, don't treat these things the same. They are not the same, but there's such a thing as kind of secular knowledge that you can have access to, and it's whole, meaning it's secular, but that doesn't mean you're not allowed to engage with it. Okay, so we've seen like kind of two different sort of strokes within Talmudic literature. So we have that first stroke of the Gemara in Sota, which really seems to say like there's really some problem with Chochmah Yavanit. And then you have these books of Homer described specifically in the Mishnah and Yadayim and in the Yerushalmi in Sanhedrin, which kind of seem to be okay. So one way to say it would just be there's Chochmah Yavanit and there's Homer, and they're actually not the same thing, and they're actually describing something quite different. And Chochmah Yavanit, that we'll see, I think I left it in here, the Rivash we're going to look at says, yeah, Chochmah Yavanit is actually this like ability to kind of like speak in these like Greek magical codes, and that's what's prohibited, but actually everything else totally fine. So we might have thought, oh, when we're talking about Chochmah Yavanit, so inside the Gemara and Sota, we already said it's not Greek language, it's a different kind of Greek wisdom. But then that would have included Homer and Plato and Aristotle and all that, right? But in once we've seen the Mishnah and Yadayim and this Yerushalmi, that really gives us pause about whether what the Gemara and Sota is talking about is actually all of this like Greek literature that we know and love, because this seems to be a quite different treatment of it. But if you want to say that they're actually the same, then that it's all kind of just one discussion of the same topic, that's also a perfectly fine read, in the sense that the Gemara often just contains multitudes and just contains people with different positions and different opinions about the same subject, and that's also a perfectly kind of acceptable thing for the Gemara to do. Okay, I am running low on time. I think I'm just going to tell you this outside instead of reading it. But this guy here, we're going to take a little trip to the 1300s in Spain. So this is the Shvilei Emunah. He is the grandson of the Rosh, who's a great halachist. The Rosh is very important because he bridged Ashkenaz and Sfarad. So the Rosh started out in Germany, came to and brought like practices of Ashkenaz with him to Spain. He fled the Rindfleisch massacres. This is his grandson, and he writes in the Shvilei Emunah that he heard. He found it written. He says in this line here, Matzati Katuv, that Aristotle, the Greek, and all of the kind of Greek wisdom, here is actually where he learned it from. He learned it all from his Rebbe Alexander the Great. Oh no, sorry, Jayara. No, sorry. He gets it right. Sorry, I thought he misread it, but he gets it right. That he was the teacher of Alexander the Great, who ruled over the whole world. And when Alexander arrived in Jerusalem, he gave Aristotle the whole treasury of Shlomo. And then Aristotle read Chakar v'Darash, all of the books of Shlomo, and he took them and he translated them and he published them in his own name, Betzikam al Shmo. And he added some mistakes of his own, and then he reburied the books of Shlomo, so that no one in the world would ever know that they were actually Shlomo's books, and he published his own under the name Aristotle, and that is how Aristotle got his tremendous wisdom and spread his wisdom throughout the whole world. So this is again Meir Ibn al-Devi, grandson of the Rosh, writing published in 1360 in Toledo, saying, and this is I always think of my Big Fat Greek Wedding when I read texts like these, like Where does it come from? It was originally Greek. This is the Jewish version, right? Where does Aristotle, this is the Jewish response to my big fat Greek wedding. Where did Aristotle get it all? Shlomo HaMelech's library that Alexander the Great conquered and handed over to him. And then he would say, okay, so the mistakes were added in by Aristotle. Anytime you see a mistake, ignore. But otherwise, to study Aristotle is to study the Torah of Shlomo HaMelech. And I give you, this is a hyperlink, by the way, so if you open it on your own screen, you'll be able to click, and the whole book is on Hebrew Books, so you can read the rest of the writings of the Shvilei Emunah and truly enjoy. It's fantastic work. Okay, so at that same times, the Rivash is also 1300s. He's in a little bit of a different part of Spain. He's in Valencia, and he gets exactly that same question. He says, what is this Greek wisdom that people are supposed to distance themselves from? And is the Greek wisdom that's described in the Gemara the same thing as Aristotle's physics and metaphysics? Okay, so then the Rivash that has a whole long Shagabataria, and he concludes that Greek wisdom is either Remiza or Davar Satum Vechida Belashon Yavan, or it's like statements and riddles. But all of that that's what's prohibited. It's these like riddles and enigmas, and it's just this form of communication, which when we were reading that story inside the Gemara and Sutta, I was kind of pushing that reading, and we kind of saw that reading doesn't so well stand out. But it seems like the Rivash wants to say, okay, this Chochmah Vanit that's prohibited, like I need to make that small, because clearly in the Rivash's world in Spain in the 1300s, Jews were reading Aristotle and being influenced by Aristotle. So he has to come up with some way to deal with it. But he doesn't like it. He really doesn't like it. And he says, here's the problem with them. I'm just saying it outside, but I brought it here for you to read, but I'm just out of time. And he says, here's the problem with them is that you can read these books. The problem is that any book that tries to uproot principles of the Torah, and specifically two principles, which are on God's, like the Hashgacha Pratit, that God oversees the world, and also the creation of the world ex nihilo, the Yesh Me'ayin, that though if anything tries to cut at your faith in those two things, that's what you should distance yourself from, he said. So any other part of Greek wisdom, totally fine. There's no specific books that are prohibited by the Gemara. What the Gemara is trying to prohibit is a specific type of communication, says the Rivash, but you have to be really super careful. And he says, oh, you might look at people like the Rambam or like the Ralbag. I just brought you a stream of the Rambam here, but he goes into the Ralbag also, and say, oh, they learned Greek wisdom and they came out fine. Which is, by the way, right, I went to the Maimonides school. Like so many modern Orthodox institutions are called Maimonides, right? Because we look at the Rambam and we say, yeah, like he learned Aristotle, he learned Plato, and look, he was able to integrate it into his Torah and created this masterpiece of the Mishnah Torah and the Shemona Prakim, which is just like the Rambam's reinterpretation of the Nicomachean ethics, and like how amazing. But here's the Rivash saying, I think the Rambam, and in the 1300s, you could do this. Today, we don't really say these types of things about the Rambam, but the Rivash here says, the Rambam got tripped up. Even someone who's so great as the Rambam, and we know how great the Rambam is because he had already learned, right, before he learned Greek literature. I don't, this part's probably not fully true of the Rambam, but anyways, he knew, oh, actually, maybe it is. Anyways, he learned, right, he knew Kol HaTorah Kula, and all the Halachot and Agadot, Tosefta, Sifra, Sifreg, all the Bavli, all the Yerushalmi, before he ever opened anything else, and we know how well he knew it because his Mishnah Torah is really amazing. And then he wrote the Morah in order to be Meshiv L'Apikoros, in order to kind of bring people back into who are struggling. That's the introduction to the Morah. Is, oh, you're really struggling because you've learned all this wisdom. Let me try and help you settle it. But he said, like, if you read the Rambam really carefully, you're going to see that he actually gets tripped up. Right? No, being called out, right? The Maimonides was drawn after some of the Greeks, of the Greeks, and that's actually really a problem. And therefore he says, and from the fact that Maimonides and the Rambam were drawn after the Greeks, and they didn't just read it and kind of enjoy and whatever. They actually it influenced them a little bit, and that's a problem. And so anyone who's not one of the Shnei Hamalachim Ha'ila, one of these two kings, the Rambam or the Ralbag, it needs to really, really be careful when exploring this literature, and therefore he advises against. But while he's advising against, he says, first of all, the prohibited thing is not was not Aristotle. Second of all, here's what, and then he gives guidance, right? Here's what you have to be careful of. And don't think like, oh, I can do it, I'll be careful. Like, it's really hard to be careful, and these two really huge greats tried to be careful. So those are kind of like two, like 1300s in Spain, you're having a lot of discussion about this, and two very different directions that it got taken in. So just to summarize, and we'll look at one last source together. So we saw the problem, which is we have a whole holiday about the defeat of the Greeks and the protection of the Torah from Greek infiltration. And then we saw the Gemara in Sota, the Mishnah in Sota, which says not to study Greek, and the Gemara, which kind of tames that and tames it again, but still retains this general discomfort with Greek wisdom. And then goes on, so that was like one direction that we saw in the Talmud, but then we saw this other direction in Yadayim and in Sanhedrin, which seems to be a little bit more comfortable, at least with the works of Homer. You can have them, don't treat them like your Torah, but like, okay, you're reading a financial document, you're reading Homer, that's okay, it's allowed. And so that makes it seem like, what's the problem? That maybe Homer is different from philosophy. First of all, I don't know whether that distinction might not 100% make sense. That's one option. Another option would be what the Rivash suggests, which is that Chokhmah Yavanit is actually not a book at all, or not a thinker at all, but is actually like some like form of communication. Maybe the Shvilei Amuna might say, what is this prohibited Chokhmah Yavanit? It's anything they didn't steal from Shlomo HaMelech. If they stole it from Shlomo HaMelech, then it's not Chokhmah Yavanit, it's ours. But all the mistakes he added in, that's Chokhmah Yavanit. That's what's prohibited. So lots of different directions for this. I just want to end with just a source that's like truly one of my favorites. Shal ben Dama ben Achoto Shal Rabbi Yishmael at Rabbi Yishmael. So Ben Dama, who's the son of Rabbi Yishmael's sister, asks Rabbi Yishmael, I have learned the whole Torah. Am I now allowed to learn Greek wisdom? So he read him this verse: the Torah scroll should not depart from your mouth, and you should contemplate it day and night. And then Rabbi Yishmael said to him, say, Uvdok sha'a she'ina lo min hayom, v'lo min halayla, umod ba chokhmah yavani. Go and search for an hour that is neither part of the day nor part of the night, and learn Greek wisdom in it. Which would then mean Greek wisdom is not in and of itself problematic. You're just not supposed to learn it at any time, because you should be spending all of your time learning Torah. And so then what we see happen in the 20th century is, and even before in Germany, is people saying, and even before that, meaning even in the 1300s, potentially in Spain, people saying, hold on, maybe it is Torah, maybe, right? That's what we saw the Shvilei Amuna starting to say. It's not, when I learn this wisdom, it's not that the Torah is, and it's not that I'm not being V'hagita Bo'olam V'layla. I am, because I'm learning more about the majesty of God's creation, learning more about the majesty of the Torah, learning more about the wisdom that God gave to humanity, as I study these other things, and that in and of itself is a worthy project. That maybe the Shvilei Amuna would have us believe is the inheritance, that is our inheritance from King Solomon himself, the author of some of our greatest works of wisdom literature, and so maybe what we would say back to Rabbi Yishmael is that this too is Torah, which I think is certainly what the Rambam would say, and I guess that's kind of how we have to think about it in our own times. And at the same time, I every year I come back to it and have the same conversation that I mentioned from the beginning of, like, I look at my Play-Doh brick and I say to myself, like, there's what to be concerned about, and I think the Rivash's perspective of that there are really problematic things in these books, and we read the Chanukah story and we see just how violent the Greeks were, and we have to take seriously, like, where does our wisdom come from? What type of person, and put it out there into the world? Is that who we should be learning from? And even if the answer is, they had good wisdom and it's good to learn it anyways, and it's definitional for the world that we live in, it's still I think important every year to like take a moment, step back, take stock of what we're doing, and ask those questions again. So even while I do always end up back with my Play-Doh brick, I also I think that the questions themselves are important, and knowing that within our tradition we have strong voices in the Gemara itself saying, like, back up, this might be really problematic, and that has always been also a voice that's carried through our halachic literature to this very day, though that typically is the definitional distinction between our community and other communities. But other communities' Torah is our community's Torah is still it's still very, very important to ask questions about, nonetheless. So thank you so much. It was wonderful to come back to Chicago virtually and learn some Torah with all of you.
Chanukah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any just reflections or questions before Rabbanit Leah signs off? I know it's later in Philadelphia, and Rabbanit Sarna has a young one, probably waking up early.
Night, so I'm doing
he sleeps through the night.
There's
Wow.
a whole chapter on this topic coming up too, like in a week, right? In Asara B'Tevet, we part of the fast. A major reason for the fast is the completion of the Septuagint, and so Greek language and Greek translations of Torah, and as opposed to the explosion of English translations of Torah that are going on now that nobody's fasting over, etc.
Yeah, I mean, my teacher, Rabbi Mintz, likes to Adam Mintz likes to teach about this and ask exactly those questions. Once upon a time, we thought the translation of the Torah was a tragedy, and in our own day, we fund it and we celebrate it, and we see it as a growth of Torah. And I think kind of the same project that I'm encouraging in terms of like us raising the big questions behind modern Orthodoxy on Chanukah. Like I think Asar B'Tevet, and it's not just the modern Orthodox who fund those translations.
Sure.
And I think that Asar B'Tevet is a good moment to kind of take stock of that and to rededicate ourselves to Torah education and to Hebrew language education in general also. Because we wouldn't need those translations if we could all perfectly read and write in all the languages, or just read, I guess, in all the languages that our texts are written in, and halavai that we can build a community where that's possible. So
yeah, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming to learn. It's good to learn with you again.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much, Rabbanit Leah, for that challenge, and challenge accepted to wrestle with these questions and to rededicate ourselves to learning and to being primarily rooted in our own tradition and text, and then with the strength there to be able to go on and access and engage with worldly wisdom. Challenge accepted. Let's all be zocha to lift up ourselves and to meet that challenge. So thank you so much, and.
Happy Chanukah.
We'll hope to find more opportunities to learn again with you soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.